In this recording, I am going to walk you through, with my project, how to calculate the capital budgeting metrics. You'll see we'll do payback period and NPV first, and then I will save that, and then we will do a internal rate of return calculation. The reason that I break those up is that when you do the internal rate of return, you have to change some of the formulas around, and so I like to preserve the version before I mess that up. So the first thing I do is I'll go to the scenarios page and just make sure of a couple of things. One is I want to make sure which scenario we're running, and looks like we're running the base case. Remember that the way that I have my workbook set up, whatever I put in this base case is whatever the forecast actually shows at this point. It is, I agreed, I negotiated a 14.95% cost of capital. And so, how did I figure that out? For my project under the likely scenario, I basically went through and assumed a $900,000 debt, therefore $500,000 equity investment. My debt investment was at 8%. My equity investment required 40% stake in the business, which yielded a implied cost of equity of 35.71%. So, 32.5%. So I got 8% debt, but 32% equity. And I had to have a little bit more debt and a little bit less equity, a little less debt and a little more equity, simply because when I went up and looked at my assets, the total value of my assets, land, building, equipment, was only going to be about 1.2 million, and I just wasn't confident that I could get financing for that at a low interest rate for more than about 900,000. So bottom line is, from my negotiations, that's kind of what I wound up with. So we're starting out with that 14.95% weighted average cost of capital. And since that's negotiated now in all of my scenarios, they're all going to be 14.95%. I don't change that anymore. I'm going to go ahead and make this equal to the present value, just so that it always changes with it. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to calculate payback period. Payback period. Again, you can look at the discussions of payback period and how it's used separately, but in a nutshell, payback period is how many periods does it take in order to pay back the initial investment. So first thing we're going to want to talk about are call it length of period, and we're talking about that simply because not everything we have in here is the same length. We have stuff that's a 1/12 of a year, right? Sorry, I should have just done that as equals 1/12 of a period, and we'll fix that formatting. There we go. Which we can carry out until month 12, and then every period after that is a full year, which we can just copy and paste out if we want. So, okay, and so we have to have the length of each period, and you'll see in a minute why. Okay, and then we're going to have our initial investment. This is the thing that has to be paid back. And we're just going to go ahead and set that equal to the negative operating cash flows from month 0. There we go. I should have put that over there. I'll drag it over. Okay. And then we've got the other OCFs, right? So the other operating cash flows, let's just call it future. So rather than the period 0, the future OCFs. And we'll set that equal to, we'll just go up here and grab the next ones. There we go. And again, we can drag that on out. And honestly, present value or payback period is one of those things that's a lot easier to calculate on napkin, or at least estimate, than probably on a spreadsheet. But need to do this and kind of automate it for you. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to do what I call the payback balance. All right. And so in month 0, that is equal to whatever the initial investment is, because we haven't paid anything back yet. In month 1, it's equal to the month 0 balance plus whatever the month 1 cash flows are. Right? And we just continue to carry that on out. And you'll see that we start out kind of paying things down, and there comes a point in time out here where the cash flows start going positive, right? And so you'll see here you have a little bit of a negative, and then in this one you start going positive. And so what you're wanting to do, you're using that to say at what point have we paid everything else back. And so we'll go with a call it a payback in process. I don't care what you call that, but anyway, we're going to use this logic here that says is equal to if the payback balance is still negative and therefore is less than 0, then count that as a period, otherwise just treat it as 0. Okay, you'll see here in just a second what that does. So we're going to pull that all the way out. All right, and you'll see what it does is every period that we have not yet paid everything back, it counts that period, and it just says, oh, make sure that you count that, right? And then in the period it goes positive, you don't count that as a full period. So now we have to have some other logic that is the partial payback period. I suppose I could call this the full payback period. We'll just change that name. Right, so periods when it's a full period of paying back because we haven't paid it all back. And here the issue is we're going to get out to this period where we have paid it all back and it took less than the full period to do that, right? And so in that situation, what we have to do is use a little bit more complex formula. So it equals if, and then we're going to use something called an and. And so two conditions, if they're both true, then we're all good. So if this value, so if the current period full payback is equal to 0, meaning that everything's been paid back, but the prior period is greater than 0, meaning we haven't paid back yet, then I want to take the ratio of the amount paid back, or basically the balance divided by the payment. It's a little bit complicated. You'll have to go read on what we're trying to do there in order to do that, to understand why. And if that's not the case, it's equal to 0. All right, and so since we haven't paid the full amount balance back and we aren't into a positive number yet, that's 0. And it continues to be 0 all the way out till this period right here, right? Because if we look at our formula, it's saying if this is 0, meaning we've achieved a positive balance in this, right? And but the prior period is not 0, meaning we haven't gotten to a positive balance yet, then that must mean this is the period when we pay everything back. And so we need to figure out how much we paid back in this period. And that's what that's doing, is basically that. And you'll see why. The reason is because then payback periods is simply equals the sum of all the periods that it was paying back, but hadn't paid back all the way, plus the partial period that it did. So it comes back and says, oh, it's going to take about 4.953 years to pay this project back. Okay, and so that under the likely scenario is our payback period. So we could just say payback period, and we'll go grab that and say it's equal to whatever's over here. Okay. And I'll fix the formatting on that. I don't like how small this is. We'll make this a little bigger. There we go. So my payback period is about 4.95 years. Okay. And then net present value is actually exactly equal to the present value that we've been using. So we can just do that. And again, you can go read a little bit more about that, but it is effectively, in all senses, it's the same thing, calculated exactly the same way. And so we're going to create over here a tab called Capital Budgeting Metrics. And we'll just go ahead and use the likely bad and good scenario labels that we already have. All right, and we're going to do a payback period. We're going to do an NPV, and eventually we'll do an internal rate of return. All right, but we've already calculated for our likely value, so we'll just grab those and pay special values. Then I'm just going to go ahead and pay special formats so that it looks the same as it did before, and we're all good. So now all we got to do is basically go try out our different scenarios here. So we'll put the bad one in. You see the bad one, the payback period goes all the way to 10, and the NPV is negative. What's going on there is that there's not enough cash flows to even pay back all of the initial investment by the end of the project. So obviously not a great outcome, but useful for us. Useful in terms of that we now have that piece of information. We kind of know what we're dealing with there. All right, then we'll go put in our good scenario. Okay, and that pays back in 1.3 years and has a present value of $5 million. Now, none of this obviously is talking about what you do with that information. That's for later. But you're at least capturing these statistics, and that's what you really want to do in this stage, is calculate out all your statistics. All right, so that's all for those, and then we're going to save this, and then I'm going to go File, Save As, and we're going to replace the payback and NPV with an IRR, and you'll see why here in a second. Basically, when you do the IRR, we'll go back over to our forecast sheet here and do IRR value, right? The challenge there is that the internal rate of return is whatever your cost of capital would be that would set the present value of your business or the NPV equal to 0. All right. And so let's see, let's go ahead and put ourselves back on the likely scenario again real quick. All right. So what we want to do is we're going to use GoalSeek again, and we got to set this WACC equal to 0. Well, right now it's got a formula in there, and the GoalSeek won't work on that. So we have to just type in 14.95. See how that destroyed that formula? We can no longer use this spreadsheet for things like calculating a weighted average cost of capital. We can only use it for our IRR. I'll just make this equal to whatever that is so we can see it easily. So because we've sort of destroyed that by taking this step, we destroyed the ability to calculate the WACC. I like having this in a sort of a separate file. That way we can revert back. So anyway, at this point, all you're doing is you're going to do data, what if analysis, goal seek. And what you want to do is set the present value of the business equal to 0 by changing the WACC. So it's going to run through, and there you go. All right, and it's going to say, oh, that is a 26.66% WACC. We'll capture that under the likely. Pay special values. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and format. I'll just do all of those as a percent with a couple of decimal places on it. There we go. I'll make this bigger so you guys can see it. There you are. All right, and now we're going to go change our scenario from likely to bad. And go back over to the forecast tab and resolve this thing. So again, data, what if analysis, oops, sorry, hit the wrong thing. What if analysis, goal seek. All right, and we're again setting the present value of the business equal to 0 by changing our WACC. Runs through, says, oh, now it's 7.81%. All right, so under the bad scenario, not nearly as good of a internal rate of return. Not surprising, obviously. So now we got to go set ourselves to the good scenario. You'll notice as I'm pasting all of these that what I'm not doing is pasting the 14.95 cost of capital. It's the same in all of them, so you could paste it if you want, but since we don't need it, I don't worry about it too much. All right, so now we've got the good scenario in, and we're going to again come in here and do our data, what if analysis, goal seek, set the present value of the business equal to 0 by changing the WACC. And okay, so that's a 73.88% internal rate of return. All right, so we've got quite a wide swing in terms of our metrics. All right, I'm not going to spend any time in this video talking about how to interpret those because that's covered in the course. But the bottom line is that at this point, I'll just hit save, and you now have information that you can use. I will probably pretty that up for the charts, but that's pretty much all I expect you to do. If you have questions, just be sure to come to class and ask.